Hello, my name is Tom from PlayFrame, and this is part 4 of my series of tutorials of how to make mixed media pieces using tilt brush and photogrammetry. In this final part, I retexture the simplified scan from last video, upload it to Poly, and then download it into tilt brush to make a final piece with it. On with the video! So I'm quite happy with that. Let's have a look at it. So then we can actually see what the current texture looks like on it. And it looks fine, but it looks a bit weird. The reason it looks so weird is because this texture is designed for a much higher resolution model. So what we need to do, we need to put a new texture on it. And this is the most complicated part, which is took me a while to learn. This is rebaking higher resolution textures onto a lower detail models, and that means you need to put the old model back in, which has all the data on. It's also a really nice thing because we actually remove all that extra data that we have from the higher resolution model, which is all the extra landscape around it and all the rubbish that we cut off right at the beginning. We don't want any of that texture because it's just going to fill up space when we're uploading it to Poly or when we're bringing it down into tilt brush later on. So to make it simpler, we want to get rid of that. So the first thing we can do is actually just remove all of that texture information that's connected to this model. So over here, when we've got the mesh selected, we can choose here our material properties. Now material is what the textures are connected to, but it's just a term. That's all you need to really think about. And I'm going to be deleting all these textures, these different, and as you can see, I delete them. The color is coming off the mouse, and eventually it should have no color at all. There you are. It's a white textured, just the model, and there's no actual picture. So we need to add a new material. So I press new, and that creates a new material, and that's material 01. Now, when altering materials, it's good to have an extra window here for all the nodes, and you need to change it to the right one because the default is actually an animation thing here for making video editing, which is I'll be doing later with this video, but we want to go to shader editor, and shader editor gives us the information for this material, and it's all divided using the system called nodes, which are little menus that you connect to each other with bits of string. You don't need to worry too much about what any of this is. The only thing is we need to add a new texture mode, which is going to be a image texture, which will be our new texture at some point, and we connect the color node to the base color here. Now there is no information on this at the moment, which is why it's just gone black, but there will be when we bake in the new texture. But first of all, we need to do some UV editing, which is discussing, like looking at how the texture is applied to the model. So previously the UV was very complicated because it was for the whole shape. Now we're just doing the UVs for this thing. So I select the whole object using A, and anything that's part of that object, you can see that's the old UVs, very complicated all over the place. We want to make new ones, so I press U, and I choose this Smart UV project, and it gives me some settings. Islands are what we call like the bits of area that are on the UV. I usually set that to just the minimum setting of just one click of 0.03, so they can be quite close together, and I press OK. And there we are. We have a nice map there of all of the bits of this model laid out flat in front of us. So we make a new texture for this, and I always call it baked and the name of the object. So in this case, it's a baked mouse. You can laugh at that if you like. And I usually set the texture size to 2048. This means it's always related to the number 1024, 2048. The other one is like a 4K texture, which would be 496. But yeah, if you ever work in textures or computers, you start learning these numbers quite easily. But yeah, 2048 is the one I use for this, and I press OK. That just puts a blank texture there behind it. That's what we're going to be baking to. And if I go back to the layout space, the layout tab, I can actually select that here and say I want the baked mouse to be attached to the color here. But the baked mouse has nothing on it at the moment. So Also, I'm going to just change these settings here. I need to set the roughness to high and the specular down. This is something that Poly has a bit of a problem with. So just make sure you've got your roughness all the way up and everything else is down. Otherwise, you end up with shiny objects when you don't really want them to be shiny. Okay, brilliant. So there's our mouse. I'm going to save it now. It's always a good idea to save when you feel like you've got to a relatively good stopping point. I'll just save it as mouse because it's a .blend file, so I know it's separate from the mouse MG or the mouse picture or the baked mouse PNG, which will be the texture that we'll have later on. And now I need to do a weird thing, which is I need to re-import the old model, the original model. So back within the Meshroom cache of the mouse folder, so mouse folder, Meshroom cache, texturing, folder with the long number, then I'm going to re-import that original textured mesh OBJ. Because what we're going to do is we're going to bake the textures from one onto the other, so that you've got all that nice information there. And you may not remember the first thing that I did when we included the object was that we had to put it in the right position. Well, what I often do in this situation is instead of putting this object in the same position as this one, I'll actually take my new simplified version of the mouse, and I press this click in here to change its location, and I'm just going to return it to 0, which means I set the location to 0 and I set the rotation to 0. So that should be exactly where it was when it came in. Now this one, for some reason, the other when you repeat a texture, I think it comes in at 90 degrees on. Not a texture, sorry. When you repeat import a model, it comes in 90 degrees on from where the original is. So if I return that to 0, that means they're completely overlaid with each other. And you can see that that's the case because you can see the black of the simplified model coming over where some of the original model is. That's perfectly normal. They're very close geometry, but they're not exactly the same. Then I select, now this is the bit I spent ages learning how to do properly because it is just a classic pressing the right button. If you have your simplified model selected, and I can tell it's a simplified one because the orange line is just going around the mouse. I've got it selected. Then I hold down Shift, and then I select the more complicated model, the textured mesh 001, which is the thing around it. That means they are both selected. However, this window here is only talking about my original simplified model, and that's really important because you want to be baking that. You want to be pressing bake on the simplified model, not on the more complicated model, otherwise the information might be going the wrong way. We need to go to this panel here, which is the render properties, and we have to change the engine to cycles. I don't understand why, but that's what we need to do. We change it to cycles, then the bake object, the bake option is here. And we're going to select diffuse. Now, diffuse is just a fancy word for texture, and we're just going to try and set it to the color. We're also going to use this button, which we're going to select it to active, which says that this is the active one that we want to actually be baking to. And I have to select a ray distance as well. Now, I select the ray distance sometimes quite like maybe 0.5 of a meter, so that's half a meter, which means it will find the data from the nearest side of the other model and bring it to that one to bake onto our UV. I'm going to select the margin I'm going to take the margin to really low again. It can be only 2 pixels, doesn't really need to be very much at all. And then once I believe I've got that all set up, I can then just press bake and hope. It might take a couple of minutes. This will depend on how powerful your computer is. Mine is pretty powerful, but even then it might take a minute or two to work out. So I'm just going to press this now. That says it's done, but how do I check? Well, let's go over to UV editing here, and hopefully if I just select my old one, which I will actually remove I'll use the hide button to hide the object, and I can see here that was the UV that I baked earlier. I cut open earlier, and now it has baked all this fresh texture information to it. It's and you can almost see the parts of the mouse there working fine. If we go back to layout, we'll actually see that the information has then baked to our new texture, our new model, our simplified model. There's a couple of errors we'll need to just tidy up, but on the whole, that's come out very well. Brilliant. So where do we go from here? Well, we need to do some very similar to the process that you have in Photoshop, where you clone stamp bits of one picture to another to tidy up any errors or hide people if you want to from photographs. So first of all, though, I want to put my model back in the right place. So I'm going to rotate it around again, put it back into the middle. So we're going from 1 and then 7. I'm going to look for it and put it back in the middle. That just means that I know that my camera is now focused on the middle of the object, and just makes it a lot easier to work on, especially when I'm going to be looking at lots of different angles, which I will be when I'm doing some texture painting. So let's have a look at what we're going to do. So we go to texture paint, and we just kind of select shaded version, and then I'll look at this bit here that we're going to maybe try and sort out. So I'm going to use the 3D cursor to select a bit of the other world, and then that allows me to texture paint, literally clone stamp over parts that don't look quite right, for example. Just make sure if you ever find yourself in the wrong one, just go back to texture paint. That's the one. It's got the clone stamp. Okay. And that means it's taking the information from that bit of wood and then putting it onto the rest. I'm actually going to leave that bottom. I really like the effect there. It's still wooden-ish, so it looks okay. The bottom of the wood looks okay as well, I would say. Maybe let's just have a look at the bottom of those feet. So yeah, lots of certainly anything that's black you really want to just clone stamp over to make it look like a full image. This is particularly good when I'm doing plasticine models, because on plasticine models there's only going to be a few colors, and the colors are also often a bit washed out anyway, or washy to some extent, so it's quite easy to do it. That's an error that's come from the baking process, so I can just put that, I can clone stamp the color from one bit of acorn to another. And his face is a little bit messed up, but we'll see what we can do. Use the lines that are already there, you see. Make him a smiley face. I will say it's not my finest work, but I'm quite happy with it, though. It's certainly good enough for just demo purposes to show you what the process is like. As I say, the longer you spend on this, the better it can be, but at a certain point you have to just decide you're happy with the level of the modeling that you've managed to get to. I mean, I still think it looks wonderful, and I still think it's a bit of a magic trick. So once that's done, you need to do two things. You need to save the texture, and then you need to save the object, the OBJ file, because those are the things we'll be uploading to Poly. So to save the texture, you go to either UV editing or texture paint, and then you realize that this is your texture. It's very important. This is the thing that's all the color information for the object. So we're going to go to image here. We're going to save as, and I'm going to put it in the same folder as all the mouse photos as a baked mouse PNG. So save as image, done. Now I need to go to the object and export the object. Now I've had a little bit of a bug sometimes when I've uploaded objects that sometimes it's not, it gets a bit confused about which texture it's attaching to it. So often what I do is go within the shader port here and I reattach the baked mouse PNG just to make sure that it knows which one it's talking about. It's talking about the one in the mouse folder, not the one that's within this version of Blender or whatever. So we open that image again. It won't change any pictures that are on the thing, but it is just, we're just resecuring that connection. Let's remove the high detail one here, delete that, so that we've just got this low detail one. And then there's a weird thing here where I like to set the origin to the geometry. This is obviously something you don't have to worry about, but it just means that when you're rotating the object within, say, poly, it's going to be rotating around the object, not where the origin was on some original model from a long time ago. So this is just something you go set to origin, and you go origin to geometry. Just means that if I do twirl it, it's going to be twirling around that point rather than some midpoint out in the distance there. It's very important that we don't do that until the final step of the model, though, because otherwise it's impossible to get the models perfectly lined up to do the baking. Anyway. Now I'll select that object and I'm going to go export. I'm going to go export wave front OBJ. I'm going to put it into the mouse folder. So it's mouse.obj. Export mouse. It's done that very quickly. Brilliant. And now I'll minimize this and we'll have a look at our mouse folder. And you can see there, that's not the mouse folder, that's the room cache. We'll go back to my mouse folder. We've got the baked mouse PNG. We've got the mouse OBJ, and we've also got a mouse.mtl, which is standard for a OBJ file. So what we need to do is upload all of those to Poly. So now I go to Poly. Now I'm already logged in. And we go to upload a 3D object. And there's a limit on how big this can be. It can't be hundreds of megabytes. This is part of the reason why we make a simplified version of it, but also it will work better in the game engine. So I select the mouse MTL, this mouse OBJ, and the mouse PNG. And I drag those into here. You see I've got all three objects there into this box, and it uploads it. And then it does some importing and basically importing it into Poly's own engine, which is how the engine works with Tilt Brush as well. Hopefully, yes, our mouse is there. Wonderful. So I'm going to call that mouse. I'm going to keep it as a category. Here, I'll put it as animal and pets, bit of fun. But the visibility, I always keep stuff public, and I always allow remixing. Allowing remixing is very important because it allows people to download them into their own models and then do what they like with them. And I think that's a really important part of this collaborative process, because if anyone does do that, it doesn't take away my model. That's the wonderful thing about digital technology, is that we're able to produce so many different versions of the same thing, and no one ever loses out. Everyone's got access to it. A couple of settings here. I sometimes like to put that up a little bit more and maybe increase the lighting so it looks a bit nicer. Quite happy with that. Yeah, a bit of that extra lighting goes a long way. And then I just press publish. And then it should be within my Poly account. And I'll go to VR now and show you what it is like in Tilt Brush. And I'll come up with something to do with it. Hello, and here we are in Tilt Brush again. And now I'm just going to show you the mouse in Tilt Brush. So we're going to go with our controller, point to interact, into new sketch. Here we are in our blank Canvas. We go to Poly Library. And we go to Your Models. And you can see there, the front one now, the most recent one that I've uploaded is the mouse. I click that, and there you are. It brings it in. So it's managed to download it really quickly, and it's come out quite small. Of course, if I want to make it life size, I'm going to stretch it out with both hands and put it on the ground there. There we have it. Now I can walk around it almost like it's a real object. Great. Right, I'm going to have a little play, and I'll see you in a minute, or you can watch this sped up as I try and make something to do with this mouse. Well, there we are. It's a simple drawing. It's not using a lot of ideas, but you know, it's this idea of like, well, he's on a tree trunk with an acorn, so why not have a tree and a nice luscious green environment around him? And you might have noticed some of the techniques I used in there, copying and pasting, using different hull shapes, and the taper of the brush really helps bring out the nice effects, but I'm quite happy with that. I love the fact that he's affected by the light, so we can, if we want, we can choose a specific environment to put him in, like well, we keep it here, but then what we do is we go to lighting, and if you want, I could actually change where the light is shining from, so I could put him from over there, and I could make it a more orange light. So it's like the end of the day. And obviously, you could actually try and pretend that it was emitting from an actual sun, which is quite a lot of what people quite like to do. If you take that, get the light tool, and we can pretend that he's having a nice lovely acorn at the end of a long day. Well, thank you very much for following this video and watching us create a mixed media piece of art with a real objects that I was found in a forest about a year ago that I scanned at the time, and now I'm able to include into this full tilt brush now, and I'll be able to upload it directly to my account. And then I'll be able to share it with the world, view it on any kinds of device that has access to the internet. And you can do this too if you come to one of my workshops. Thank you very much.